Well, hey friends, I have a super fun episode for you today, and it is our last guest episode and our last episode of 2025. So, you know it is going to be good. Today, my guest is named Crystal Allen. She is joining us to share her testimony, and I am so excited for you to hear it. I first heard her testimony on my friend's podcast, my friend Caitlin Gaff, who hosts the Reconciled podcast. And so I'm really excited to have Crystal on our show too. A little bit about her before we get started. Crystal is a Christian and she owns a home renovation business with her husband in her local area. She's a mom of 3 and a mama, I think is how she says it, of 7. Her hobby is definitely thrifting. She loves to thrift and show outfits on social media. Girl, I can relate. She also loves waterfalls and hiking with her grown children. She is such a fun person, you guys, and her testimony is so powerful. So I cannot wait for you to hear that. Without further ado, here is Crystal Allen on the Abortion Recovery for Christian Women podcast. If you're tired of living with shame and guilt and want simple steps to heal, find peace, and feel less alone after abortion, you are in the right place. Hey, I'm Brittany, wife, homeschooling mom of 2, abortion recovery coach, and pro-life speaker. I learned the secret of how to find healing and redemption from my past. Spoiler alert, it's Jesus. If you're ready for tactical post-abortion healing tips, biblical truth, and strategies for grieving forward, then this podcast is for you. Let's crack open that Bible and get ready to receive the good news. Well, hey friend, I want to invite you right now to book an abortion recovery breakthrough call with me. During our time together, we are going to learn how to partner with God and go through the necessary steps for you to heal from your past decision or decisions of abortion once and for all. Head to brittanypoppy.com/coaching to get started. Hello, everyone. We are back for another episode of the podcast, and I have a very special guest with us today. Her name is Crystal Allen. She has such an amazing God story, and I cannot wait for you to hear it. So, Crystal, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Brittany, for having me. I'm very
Yes,
excited.
yes, I've been looking forward to this for a long time. I'm so excited that it's worked out and that you've taken the time to come on today. I just know that the ladies who listen are going to be so blessed by your story. But before we get into all that, I would love if you would just tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Okay. Well, I am first and foremost a Christian and a wife and mother of 3 and grandmother of 7, 3 of those grandchildren we are raising, and we have been raising them for 10 years. So we have a home renovation business here locally that we've been doing for about 3 years. So we're still kind of a baby business. So it's learn as you go. Very
Yes.
busy.
Yes. Oh, that sounds so busy, but so fulfilling and fun. And what a fun business to be a part of. I bet that is a lot of fun to just get to see the transformations as you're renovating all the things.
Absolutely. And of course, I had, the idea that it was going to be like Chip and Joanna or something like that. But they make it look easy.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure there is like so much more hard work that goes into it that we don't see on TV. That's for sure.
Definitely. There's not enough time in an hour to show everything that happens for sure.
Yes, definitely. Oh my gosh. Well, so fun. Well, I am really excited for the listeners to hear your story. So feel free to just let the Holy Spirit lead you. Share with us whatever you're feeling led to share. A lot of times we like to kind of go back to the beginning. So go back to the beginning, tell us a little bit about your background, and then tell us your story.
Okay. Thank you, Brittany. So I'm an only child, born to my mom. She did not think she could have children, and she became pregnant actually out of wedlock. And did not stay with my biological father. After that, or during actually her pregnancy, or maybe before, she met a man who I now call dad. He ended up adopting me and marrying my mom. They got together when I was about 6 months old. So when I was around 5, they got married and started going to church. I believe that those things were probably connected. And we got into a holiness church, which was a very religious church with a lot of rules. So I grew up wearing dresses and not cutting my hair, not wearing makeup, very different than most of my classmates in the public school forum. That probably caused me a little bit of distress, I would say, just being a little more different than most of the kids and constantly being asked about those things. But as I grew older, I started to question a lot of the beliefs, like, why do I have to wear dresses to be a Christian? And does Jesus really say this? Does it really say this in the Bible? Of course, I was taught the Bible verses that went along with the beliefs and the doctrines. And those were the Bible verses I would repeat to my classmates when they asked me those questions. But I still was iffy about the belief system. I started to rebel into my probably late middle school, early high school years, and sneaking around and wearing pants and sneaking around and wearing makeup and things like that. And as that progressed, that led to, being more interested in probably the boys outside of church and the ones that were even troublemakers, or what people would call a troublemaker. And those were the kind of guys that I began to be attracted to and start relationships with. So on up into high school, my junior year, I started dating a guy who fits that perfectly. And my parents, of course, they weren't thrilled with it, but at the same time, what much can you do about who your child, ends up dating? They'll, especially with me, I was being rebellious. I would sneak around, I would sneak out at night, those type of things. I began to experiment with alcohol at that point, and he had a lot to do with that. We ended up getting married my senior year. My parents, they did approve it because I believe they, were doing what they thought was right according to the religious rules that we live by, and what the Bible says, that, certain things outside of marriage that they knew that I was doing weren't right. And so they went ahead and signed for me to get married at 17. I was nearly 18, and I think that they probably, did that because they knew I would probably sneak off and get married anyway once I turned 18. That relationship, he had a lot of problems in his background, and it just didn't mesh at all. We ended up doing a lot of drinking and fighting, and there was domestic violence involved, and we did get a divorce after just 10 months of marriage. So I kind of had a rough start, to adulthood. And I feel like that kind of laid out the path that I took for the next several years after that. Just looking for love, wanting to be loved, going back to the bio dad didn't really want me. That's what my mom told me. And so I had that void and I didn't really know how to fill it. I had been saved when I was around 12 years old. So I did have that foundation of Christianity. But again, like I said, I questioned so much about our religious beliefs as a family and as a church that it kind of made it unstable. And from that point, after that divorce, I really started to go downhill with so many things. I became anorexic and bulimic. I was probably 85 or 90 pounds. And I mean, I'm 5'2", so, that's still thin for someone 5'2". And from that, I think I moved on to, things like more alcohol, um, different types of drugs I experimented with, going from boyfriend to boyfriend. And I ended up with a guy that my parents definitely did not want me to be with. And I was honestly happy with him. I was having fun. And that's, really something that I guess I felt like I had missed out on a lot in life with the strict upbringing that I had. It always seemed that everyone else was having fun and I was not allowed to go. So that relationship is the relationship that my pregnancy came from. And immediately I was advised by people who loved me and I thought wanted what was best for me. And I believe they thought it was what was best for me. I was immediately advised to have an abortion. Um, the abortion appointment was made. I was probably about a month along, maybe a little bit further along than that. And my mom didn't drive and my dad was working. So we asked a neighbor to take me. And the closest abortion clinic at that point to my hometown was Chattanooga. So we were going to go to Chattanooga. Well, either the night before the appointment or the morning of, the guy that was supposed to take us backed out. I don't know what made him do that. Maybe he just decided he didn't want anything to do with it. This was in the early 90s. So it was, probably a little less talked about than it is today, or quite a bit actually less talked about than it is today. So that appointment ended up being canceled. And at that point, I think I just kind of thought, well, okay, God, you're telling me that this, isn't what you want me to do. And I actually went out and bought bedding for a crib and some things for the baby and decided that I was going to keep the baby. Well, during that period of time, I started dating a guy that I really liked a lot. And my mom seemed to like him. My dad was okay with him. I'm sure they would have preferred me not to go from relationship to relationship, but I think they were just hoping that I stayed away from the father of the baby, who was at this point incarcerated. I had to take the pregnancy test from the Women's Care Center to the jail window and show him through the window that I was pregnant. So from that point, we, seemed like a happy couple. He accepted the fact that I was pregnant by someone else and, in fact, told me that he was fine with it. So we continued our relationship. And the more I began to care for him, and I would probably say that I fell in love with him pretty quickly. I started to rethink the situation and thought, maybe he won't stay with me. you know, once the baby's born, or maybe he is just saying that for now, but what about when the baby actually gets here? And so I think because the seed had already been planted about abortion, I started to think about abortion a little more seriously. And I spoke with my mom, and, you know, I really don't understand why she was okay with that idea, unless she just was so against the idea of me having a child with the previous boyfriend who was incarcerated. But she was fine with it. We made the appointment. At this point, I was probably close to 5 months along. So we had to go to Atlanta. And um, it was a 2-day procedure. When we got there that day, I did see the protesters outside. And, I've often thought about, would I be interested in being one of those protesters? And then I think back to that day for me, and I just don't think there's anything anybody could have said to me at that point that could have changed my mind. Um, I mean, I believe they're doing the work. Most of them are there for the right reasons, trying to save babies' lives, and I'm all for that. But I just had my mind made up. So I kind of just ignored them and went on into the clinic. I don't remember, the name of the clinic or anything like that. This was like over 30 years ago. So, it was a long time ago. And, I guess that's something that maybe was not important for me to remember. I went in that first day, and I remember that they took me back, and they did an ultrasound. They did not let me see the ultrasound. I don't remember hearing the baby's heartbeat really. I don't remember much about that. I just remember that I was, just like you would be if you were going to an OBGYN, and going for a checkup during pregnancy. They did the ultrasound, and they spoke with my mom and myself about what was going to happen. And at that point, they went ahead and did the saline shot. Um, and they also did something, and I'm not exactly sure, but it was some kind of chemical that they inserted to cause my cervix to start dilating. So they sent me home, or not home, actually. Included in the price of the abortion was a hotel room. And believe me, it was not a good one. And I'm sure we weren't in a good part of town either. But they sent me to the hotel with a sedative and just said that I would rest. I don't even think I ate that evening or anything. I barely remember anything at all. And I remember my mom waking me up the next morning, and the new boyfriend had driven us down there because she didn't drive. And we got up early and went back to the abortion clinic, where we were called back. Us ladies and girls were called back one at a time to sit in a circle of chairs that had like a IV pole attached to them, and each one of us was given an IV. I'm assuming that was a sedative as well. And they called us back one by one. As we were sitting there, I remember some of the conversations that I had with the women and the girls. And I distinctly remember a 13-year-old young lady who was just very distraught. her parents were making her have an abortion, and she didn't want to have an abortion. And then I also remember a mom who already had children, and she just said that she couldn't afford more children. And so that's why she was there, And then there was my story of, having being pregnant by someone who was incarcerated, and my parents didn't like him, and I'm an only child. I've been raised in a very strict background. I'm very dependent on my parents' opinions and what they think of me, what the church thinks of me. And so there were a lot of ladies there that I still think of today and wonder and hope that they have gotten the help that they needed, because thankfully I've been able to go through some extensive, counseling myself. But back to the story, we were called back one by one. And as far as I know, I slept through the procedure. I remember waking up and kind of being groggy, in and out of sleep, and hearing them say that I was losing a lot of blood. And, I wasn't even conscious enough, I don't think, to realize that how dangerous that was, or that, my life was probably in danger at that point. But I know that we were there for quite some time before they took me to the recovery area, where I was vomiting. I believe the sedatives or the medication they had given me had really upset my stomach, because, of course, I wasn't allowed to eat that morning. And I remember them telling me, you have to keep down some saltine crackers and lemonade before we will allow you to leave. And that took quite a while, because I would eat and then I would vomit again, and I would just continue that for, it seemed like, a couple hours before I was able to actually leave. At that point, once I was actually able to leave, that is a very confusing time for me, because I felt freedom. I felt relief. I felt like, oh, thank God I don't have to worry about this burden anymore. And I know that sounds horrible. It sounds horrible to me. I hate to say it, but it is the truth. I immediately felt just a freedom of, like, I don't have to worry about that anymore. I don't have to worry about, the fact that I disappointed my parents, or whether or not my new boyfriend will leave me once this baby is born because it's not his child. All of that was just like a total freedom. I now realize that was a denial sitting in, already immediately. So I would say that for several years, I was in denial. I ended up having a baby just over a year later with that boyfriend, and we also didn't make it. But that is my oldest son. But his father and I split up when he was 10 months old. So, we didn't make it either. I know I did not have a good foundation, as far as, I had already been through the domestic violence. While right after I got a divorce, my parents got a divorce, and then the abortion, and now another failed relationship, another disappointment, for my parents and for myself, as far as not being married and having a child, because that totally went against everything that I was taught growing up. I know that from that point, I definitely began a spiral, a downhill spiral. And I tried, and I believe that I tried my best for what I knew and what I knew how to do. I tried to be a good mom, and I loved my son, but there was always a void and just something that I was trying to fill with every chance I got, every break I got away from my baby, I was drinking or, smoking marijuana or doing something or finding, a new boyfriend or dating someone who was wrong for me. When that son was 3, I actually got married again. And that is my ex husband, who I have 2 children with. And we were married close, just under 10 years. So during that period of time, I still battled with depression, postpartum depression. Also, after the birth of one of our children, I was constantly fighting a battle of some sort. And I link a lot of it back to, the abortion and the fact that I was still in some sort of denial. I do want to say, though, during the pregnancy of our first child that I had with my ex husband, which was my second son, I was reading a pamphlet from the doctor's office, and I didn't realize it was around the same time as I had had the abortion. So I'm reading the pamphlet. It says, the baby has fingernails and I believe eyelashes. I can't remember exactly, but whatever it was, it just triggered something that woke me up, and made me realize that I had actually taken the life or chosen to allow a doctor to take the life of my child. And from that point forward, I wish that, that was, the end of the depression and distress and the downward spiral. But I believe it got worse at that point because now I wasn't in denial. I was in reality, and reality was that I chose to take the life of my child. So from that point, like I said, we had another child after that, which was finally a daughter, but our marriage only lasted a little less than 10 years. While I was pregnant with our daughter, so many miraculous things happened. Actually, right before I got pregnant with her, he and I split up, and I thought we were going to get a divorce. And I remember at that point, something was just nudging me to go back to church. Mm. And someone had invited me to a revival. I was in college at the time, I was in my middle 20s, and I was living alone, or not alone, but I had my 2 boys and myself in an apartment. And I began taking them to that revival every night and going to college and taking them to the revival. And something happened at that point that just really changed my life. Like I began to see women who had their hair cut, who wore pants, who were good Christian women. And it's like God opened my eyes. So I ended up going to the Women's Care Center again, the same one who gave me the pregnancy test for the baby that I aborted. And I searched out some kind of post abortion help. They happened to have a group. I joined the group and I began going through that group, still going to church, still going to college, trying to raise those 2 boys. And I just remember that one night I was in my living room and I started praying to God, that I would really like to have a girl. I always felt like the baby that I aborted was a girl. I didn't know that for sure, But when I was going through the post abortion counseling, they asked us to pray actually to for God to reveal to us what sex our baby was, what gender our baby was. And I just felt like it was a girl. So I named her Destiny. And I felt like I had maybe missed out on having a daughter, and I had always wanted a daughter. I had two sons. I would have been perfectly happy with another boy, but I prayed, God, if it's your will for me to have more children, I would really like to have a daughter. During this time, my husband had began to come back around and go to church with us, and things were looking up in that situation. And while I was going to that post abortion counseling group, it was like 13 weeks, I think, something like that. I actually found out I was pregnant. And so that was my daughter. And at that point, I didn't know that, obviously, but I had prayed for that. And I can look back now and see that that was God, answering prayers. And I didn't even realize it. I went through that pregnancy and made it until she was due in like 6 or 7 weeks. And they started having me go to a specialist. And I had to go every week to a specialist because I was not retaining fluid.
Mm.
And during that period of time, I think I had gone to this specialist maybe 3 times. So around the third time that I went to him, he told me that I was going to deliver today or soon, that I was going to have to deliver today or soon. I did not even understand him because his accent was so thick that I thought I had misunderstood him. So I asked the nurse, and she worked with him, and she was like, "No, I don't think he said that." But then she looked into my file, and for sure, he had definitely said that he was sending me directly to the hospital to have the baby. And so I was just like, okay, I can't do this. I've got to take my mom home, or take my mom home, get my husband, all the stuff. So it ended up that I did go back to the hospital that night. They induced labor. I had my daughter the next morning. Um, the umbilical cord was around her neck. I just really feel like the enemy was trying so hard to keep me down. And I didn't know the miracle that was being birthed literally at that point, because once everything settled down and I realized that I had had my daughter being induced, no choice of mine, 6 to 7 weeks early. And it was exactly 9 years to the day of my abortion.
Wow.
Yes, my abortion was a 2-day abortion, like I told you, and it was on May 4th and 5th. And my daughter was born on May 4th, exactly 9 years later. So, of course, every year now, instead of being sad for 2 weeks and laying in the bed like I had every year up and from the point that I came out of the denial, and and to the point that I had my daughter, I would just lay in the bed. I wouldn't go to work. It's a wonder I had a job, but I would not take care of myself. I wasn't able to take care of my children. And then that turned into the greatest miracle, because now I celebrate my daughter's birthday every year, and I don't beat myself up about the abortion. I, thankfully had healed somewhat at that point. And that was just another step in the healing, I believe, and just a miracle from God that I feel like He said, you know, I forgive you. You need to forgive yourself. So I believe I started the process of forgiving myself at that point. And, you know, during that time, God also allowed me to have a vision where Jesus came through my window, and I knew it was Jesus. I just saw his hands. He handed me, it was bright. He handed me a baby. I held the baby. He reached out his hands. I knew I was supposed to hand him the baby back. I handed him the baby back, and he went back to heaven with the baby. And so that gives me hope that one day I'll see Destiny. I'll be able to hold her and be with her forever, in heaven. And that again was another part of my healing journey. And I'm just so thankful to God that He does work in mysterious ways, ways that people don't understand, ways that people sometimes don't believe. But I know what I lived. And I know that my daughter was miraculously born out of no choice of my own, exactly 9 years to the day of my abortion. And that was no mistake. That was a miracle. And God did that for me. He redeemed my story through that. And I believe that He is continuing to use this story to help others. I know there are other kinds of abortions now that don't include, having to go to the clinic and see the people protesting and go through what I went through. But those poor women are going through that alone at home. And they still need healing, no matter if they went to a clinic or did it at home, or whether or not they're thinking about it. Maybe this will change somebody's mind about abortion, because it definitely was not worth it. And I would not ever recommend for anyone to do it. In fact, I have tried to talk many people out of it, and thankfully I've been able to talk a couple people out of aborting their babies just by sharing my story. And to this day, I have gone through another abortion recovery counseling group at another church. It was actually in Knoxville. And I I believe that I'm fully healed now. I don't cry when I tell my story. Sometimes I will get a little teary eyed because just the miracle of it,
Yeah.
the miracle of the fact of how God worked it out and how He's redeemed the story, and how the enemy was trying so hard to keep me down, even to the point I believe that, you know, um, the doctors didn't come in early enough to try to birth, help me birth my daughter, and the umbilical cord was around her neck so many times, and then the day after she was born, her lungs collapsed. I mean, I just really feel like that the enemy was just trying to take her out so that I would not ever recover from this. But God had a different story. He had a different plan. And I believe that He's been with me the entire time, even in my darkest hours, even on that long road to recovery. And I now, have nothing that I turn to medicate myself except for Jesus. And I have a wonderful family, and my daughter's now 26 years old. And I just have never been happier, honestly. And I'm so thankful that I am now able to tell that story with a smile instead of being so depressed and crying and having that regret. Not saying I don't regret it. Of course I do. Of course, if I could go back in time, I would change that. I wouldn't ever do it again. But God has redeemed that story, and I'm so thankful for it.
Yes, amen. I That's what I love so much about your story is just how God has worked so much for good and shown you that redemption is possible. And I just know that there are going to be people who hear your story, Crystal, and they may want to get in touch with you or follow along with you. Is there a way that they're able to do that?
Well, I don't have any professional social medias, but I do have a hobby of thrifting and crafting. So they can they can find me on TikTok or Facebook or Instagram at the Thrifty Cab, and or Crystal Allen on Facebook.
Awesome. Yes, I'll have those links in the show notes for them to be able to follow along with you and keep up with those things too. But thank you so much, Crystal, for coming on, for sharing your story, and for being so vulnerable. I know God is going to use it for good, and I so loved having this conversation. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me, Brittany.
Hey, beautiful friend. I hope that you found comfort from today's episode. If so, would you take 30 seconds and leave a written review in Apple Podcast or a starred review wherever you're listening? It truly encourages me to know that this podcast is helping you. Also, if you're looking for more support from other women who have walked the same walk as you, please join us in our free Facebook community, Abortion Recovery for Christian Women. Please know that I pray for you daily and I am here for you. I'll meet you back in a few days for another episode, but until then, take care and God bless.